There, alive. Hi everyone. Very happy to be joined by Peter Hain today. Do you want to start us off, Peter, with an introduction to yourself and your book?
Well, this is the book, The Lion Conspiracy, published by Muswell Press in the UK and globally, and also Jonathan Ball, publishers in South Africa and Africa. And it's really about the threat to lions. 100 years ago, there were 200,000 lions roaming the African continent, and now there are about 20,000. So you think 200,000 lions to 20,000 over a century, almost exclusively as a result of humankind, and that's essentially mankind massacring them, hunting them, and so on. It's a real threat. They're now on the verge of extinction, and by 2050 they will be extinct. They're already extinct in 30 African countries. So, and 30 African countries is more than half the number of countries on the continent. It's mainly across North and West and Central Africa that they become extinct. Southern Africa, they're a little more. They find it a little more hospitable for various reasons. So that's one of the backdrops to it. And then there's the same backdrop as there was when you first interviewed me a few years ago in 2020 for the rhino conspiracy, because this is the third in a trilogy. There's been the rhino conspiracy, the elephant conspiracy, and now the lion conspiracy. And they have similar characters, common characters at the core, and then other characters come and go according to the particular thriller it is of the trilogy. But the key link between the threat to wildlife and the thriller side of it and the crime side of it is the criminals, the international criminal syndicates, and the corrupt politicians and corrupt governments that protect them in what is a global operation in the trade of illegal wildlife right across the world. The principal demand for lion bones and claws and teeth in them exclusively is in the Far East, but it's elsewhere as well. And they as a result of consumer and human greed, these majestic animals, the kings and queens of the jungle, are now threatened with serious future extinction unless we do something about it. But it's not just a wildlife story. It's also a story about crime and criminals and politicians as well.
And it's a very good story. I've got so many questions based on this book. I'm going to start with: is it harder for people who are trying to conserve the lions to balance it, because obviously they're predators and their prey is going to have been affected as well, so it must be harder to find that balance of how to conserve them?
Well, they're wild animals, and I've been fortunate with my better half Elizabeth to go on safaris in southern Africa, principally, though we were in Kenya a few years ago, and this thriller is mainly set in South Africa, but is actually Africa wide for the first time, and includes Kenya, where we visited a wildlife park that is a safari park, Cotters camp, which is an amazing place. It's quite exclusive, and we were able to benefit from a charitable gift. But it is an extraordinary wildlife park in the Masai Mara. And so we got an insight there. I got an insight there and gave me additional ideas for the last of the trilogy of this series. But the fact that I've been involved in politics all my life, that I was brought up in apartheid South Africa as the son of brave anti-apartheid, white anti-apartheid activists who worked with Nelson Mandela amongst many others, meant that I had a political understanding, if you like, and it was the visiting wildlife and safari parks that then gave me the insight into that part of the equation, and bringing the politics together. But your question directly was about conservation.
Yeah.
And these are wild animals, so you can't just treat them as your pet dog or your pet cat, or not that anybody would expect that. But they're dangerous animals. But if you treat them with respect, then they should treat you with reasonable respect. And if you threaten them, then they'll potentially kill you. So this is not some kind of game. But these rangers and the conservationists that I've seen at first hand are absolutely extraordinary, Kaz. I mean, they devote their life to protecting these and many other wild animals, and they're risking their own lives. I mean, they're in war zones a lot of the time, fighting poachers who are often the frontline poachers of poor local Africans from local villages, just desperate for work, to put food on the table of their families. I'm not excusing them, but right up the international syndicates that I mentioned are these big criminals operating on a scale of drug trafficking, human trafficking. That's what illegal wildlife trafficking's become. So it's a constant battle between fantastic conservationists and the big crime and the corrupt politics protecting them.
You mentioned plants in this one as well, that there's quite a trade in like rare plants, which I didn't realize was as much of a thing as.
Yeah, I mean, succulents are particularly in demand at the moment, and you can get high prices for them. So, for example, in South Africa and the Cape area, which I know quite well, there's a lot of succulents, some of the richest vegetation in the world, and in other parts of Southern Africa, and they become quite valuable. And yes, you're right. It's one of the facts you found out in this book, I guess, is that you're dealing with a trade in wild, natural life, which is extending everywhere. All sorts of fish and shell species of marine life, they're under threat as well. We're a pretty destructive species, humankind, the most destructive that the planet's ever known.
There's sorry, I'm looking at the comments that are coming up. So Samantha
Right.
said hello, Sarah has said hello, Donna has said hello. She's also said she's fascinated already. William
Hi to both of you.
William Shaw said he can't listen now because he's in public, but he loves the fact that Peter Hain, such a brave politician who I heard talk so often at anti-apartheid rallies, has found a way to bring his politics into crime fiction. Plus, you have a flat in the same book as his mother-in-law, another hero of his.
Oh, really? All right. Okay. That's nice to know as well. Well, I mean, the most important thing for me is it's a good read. And you kindly indicated before we came live that you found it so, Kaz, because I came into this, I suppose, as somebody who's written, 25 non-fiction books about politics, and I'm writing another one at the moment. And there's another thriller on the way as well, which the publishers are looking at, but it's of a very different kind to this wildlife trilogy. But I read thrillers myself for enjoyment, crime myself. I mean, it's a bit of escapism from politics and all the official documents and stuff that I need to kind of absorb and have done for decades. And so if I'm on holiday, I'll read thrillers and crime of various types. And that's how the idea came, was to try and write, try my hand at writing this myself. Unfortunately, Muswell Press have liked them so far and have asked for more. As I say, they've got another one with them, which is very different and not set in a contemporary sense, but in the early 1980s. But we'll see what they make of it.
Well, William, who commented, writes fantastic thrillers as G.W. Shaw.
Oh, yeah.
So,
All right. Well, that's a privilege to have a message from you, William.
if you like thrillers, I heartily recommend his books.
Yeah.
He's
No, he's a proper thriller writer. I'm trying to be one.
well, no, because you're published by Muswell Press. We're very big fans of them in our group. They have some cracking authors
I
writing
do, yeah.
put out really good quality books. So
They're great. They're great publishers to work with. I mean, Sarah and Kate Beale, sisters, who were mainstream publishers themselves, and then took a great risk in setting up their own small publishing house to publish the books they wanted to publish. And as you say, they've got some terrific. Leaving my ones aside, they've got some terrific authors and terrific books. But selling books at the moment is apparently book sales are on the up, which is nice to hear, and have been since COVID. But it's not easy, especially with the collapse of independent bookshops.
yeah, there are. I mean, there are some good independent bookshops still, isn't there? But
There are, yeah, yeah. But it's quite hard to find them in your local high street as you always used to be able to. Though there's still some fantastic examples right across the country of independent booksellers that have survived and are have a devoted clientele as well.
yeah, which is good. We try to encourage as much use of independent bookstores as we can in the
Yeah.
group. Donna said, "Did it ever worry you writing about politics, as it's such a contentious subject?"
No, not really. I thought you might have asked me, Donna, was whether I was worried about writing about corruption. And a lot of people have asked me this because I was asked to expose the global complicity in corruption, political corruption at a very high level by the president of the time. Thankfully, he was put out of office in South Africa. And there's a lot of mafia style gangsterism around these guys. And they almost always are guys, men, are these corrupt politicians. There are some women involved, but it's mainly men. And they're dangerous people. I mean, they kill people who they don't like and who get in their way. So my family and a lot of my friends would say to me, aren't you taking a risk exposing this? Because if you read my thrillers and particularly South African politics, it's not hard to discern who some of the gangsters are based upon, and indeed some of the characters as well. I don't know about other thriller writers like William, for example, who you mentioned earlier, or the ones that I read, the ones who sell a hell of a lot of books, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, whether they use people they know to mold characters. But that's generally what I've done with my principal ones.
I
Although
think that
the young woman who's I see as the star of the trilogy, I don't know who your favorite character is, Kaz, but the young woman Tundi, a young black woman, South African, who's very feisty and tenacious and brave. She's entirely created out of just observing people.
she's high on my list of favourites. The veteran's um, wife as well.
Oh yes. Well, the veteran and his wife are both based on real people they're friends of mine, and obviously I have put words in their mouths and I've presented them as I see them. And the other one is the security minister, Yasmin. She's based on a woman who's a very close friend, and her husband also makes a passing appearance as the pilot is partly that I have, who flies this contraband across Africa in dangerous situations. He's based on somebody I know as well. And actually, in the acknowledgements, I didn't really know anything other than having been flown in small planes, both as a cabinet minister when I was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, where we used a jet, and a private jet, who hired a jet to get me to and from from Northern Ireland and the Republic and Wales, where I was also cabinet minister for Wales. And I've been in helicopters and I've been in small planes to safaris, but I don't really know anything about flying. But fortunately, my cousin, one of my cousins, was an experienced pilot, and I got I spent a couple of hours with him trying to understand what it is like to fly a plane and the preparation. So you'd probably remember that before he takes off, he's meticulous about checking the plane. The pilot concerned, the character's called Fani Minnow, who I say is based on a friend of mine. But the actual techniques of flying are something that I learned from my cousin. So quite a lot of research goes into these things.
Yeah. Normally, when you get talking to a pilot about things like that, they don't shut up.
No, that's true.
They do
Well,
like the details, don't they?
yeah, but if you're going to write about it, you've got to really understand it, and you've got to try and convey reality. So, for example, one of the things that my cousin told me, which I'd never thought about, if you're flying at night, which is when these flights are to avoid detection, carrying, lion parts and so on, and other illicit contraband. He says you never look out of the window into the darkness. You just concentrate on your instruments, because if you look out of the window, you get disorientated. And I'd never thought about that before. I'd thought, well, you'd be looking at the stars and you'd be looking to see if there are any mountains coming up and things like that. So you don't do it. You just concentrate on your instruments.
Interesting. The other fact I learned in this one was that there's kind of, I'm trying to think of the right term for them, like farms where they sort of keep captive animals that people can
Oh,
take
the
and shoot.
canned lion hunting. You mean
Yeah.
that? Yeah. No, I didn't. I was only in the course of. I was tipped off by somebody who gave me the idea, actually, at the launch of the Elephant Conspiracy thriller in 2022. We did a big launch event, and I was on this panel for 15 minutes at the event with Charlie Mayhew, who is the founder, chief executive of Tusk, this amazing wildlife charity. And he said to me, because somebody asked from the audience, so what's your next one going to be? And I said, well, I've started writing one, but I'm not quite sure how it's going to turn out. And Charlie turned around and said, it's got to be the lion conspiracy, because lions are more threatened than rhinos. And or elephants, and I hadn't appreciated that. And then when I looked it up, I realized they were. And I've quoted you the statistics about over 100 years, 200,000 lions down to 20,000, and they'll be extinct by 2050 unless we do something about it. But he said the most ominous thing at the moment in the whole territory, and I think this is what you're referring to, Kaz, is canned lion hunting, as it's come to be called. And anybody interested should read, and I've cited this in the kind of sources at the end is the website. Just go onto YouTube and put in canned lion hunting, or blood lions is the other tag, and you get this really upsetting documentary about how they breed lions. Right from birth, they take the cubs away from their. And I explain this in the book, but not in the detail that there is in if it was a piece of non-fiction or a documentary. And this documentary is really gripping about how these tiny little baby lions, only a matter of days or best weeks off, are taken away from their mothers and are stuck in cages. And there's a scene in the documentary about them wailing away. And I capture that when one of the characters visits a canned lion hunting, a pretty nasty character, to try and buy it for his boss, his gangster boss. And so they breed them to kill them. And they become completely dependent on being fed, so they could never be released into the wild again. And then the mothers, the lionesses, having had their babies taken away from them prematurely, instead of bringing them up and weaning them and feeding them and teaching them about the wild over a number of years till the point where they can go, can survive on their own and prosper on their own, are taken away from their babies, or their babies are taken away from them, and then of course they come on the heat again, and so they become factories for producing these baby lions in order to be shot by trophy hunters who will come, look through a fence, choose the lion that you want to shoot, and do so. And if it's the ones that are most prized, because they like mounting their heads on the mane and so on the walls as trophies of their homes, they'll pay $50,000 for it. And then, according to the value of the deemed value for a trophy hunter, the mine of the lion, that'll come down to perhaps 10,000. So these are businesses, factories, breeding lions to be shot. Now, I don't like trophy hunting either. There's a debate amongst conservationists about that, because a lot of them say they need the income in order to maintain conservation parks to give the great majority of lions and other animals a chance in life. But yes, that was pretty unpleasant, that scene, wasn't it?
Very unpleasant, yes.
But it's based on reality. But everything in the book, obviously, there's an element of, like there is in all crime books and thriller books, an element of invention and sort of, I don't know what you would call it, but it's not necessarily purely factual because it's fictional. But life is often, there's that old saying, isn't there, that life is often more unpleasant than fiction.
Yeah. There's another character that we find out a lot more about in this book as well, isn't there? The sniper. I think we find out more
Yeah.
about his family and things, which is quite. He's like he's quite an interesting character, because I imagine there are people like him working in these.
Well, I'm intrigued you find him interesting, because he's a character who's common to all three thrillers. And I met the person he's based on by pure chance in London. A young, well, must have been in his 40s then. I met him, a South African, and he told me that he had been, you will probably, I don't know whether you remember this or whether you've seen scenes of it, when Nelson Mandela was released from prison after 27 years in prison, in a Cape Winelands prison to which he'd been transferred in February 1990. So it's a long time ago. He took his first steps to freedom. And this guy told me that he was a trained military sniper in the South African Army, and I modeled the character on him. But I've no idea what he was really like, because I only met him fleetingly. But he told me that he'd been up overlooking the scene with his gun ready and a spotter, an African spotter. The snipers often need spotters to help them, to focus, looking for somebody who might kill Mandela as he walked to freedom. And so he was a military sniper, actually used to fighting the ANC, Mandela's guerrilla army that had been set up because they'd been made illegal, and the apartheid state was so violent they'd suppressed him, that they had, as part of their campaign, a guerrilla operation, rather like the French resistance in the Second World War. And they were worried that the apartheid government, having taken this risk of releasing a man that they regard as the devil incarnate. People now see, quite rightly, Mandela as probably the most respected global icon of our age. And yet he was feared. He was the devil incarnate just years before he was released. And they were worried, the government, having taken this step and opened up the process for possible transformation, that he might be assassinated. So this military sniper, this bloke that I happened to bump into, was actually based on overlooking the situation. And so In the Rhino Conspiracy, you might remember I start off with a scene from that around him. And in this one, his life is explained a bit more. I begin in the Lion Conspiracy with him in a situation with his son. Yeah, you found him quite intriguing, but he's based on a real person.
That scene makes it into the book as well, doesn't it? Him talking about being up and watching Mandela walking
Yes,
through them.
yes. You mean into the Lion Conspiracy book?
Yeah.
It does. Yes, it's explained more fully in the first of the trilogy, in the Rhino Conspiracy, because it begins with that. But yeah, it is. It is.
You answered one of my questions I was going to ask you a little bit earlier because you said this is a trilogy.
Yeah.
Does that mean
Yeah.
we're finished with these characters, or are we going to find out anything more about them?
Well, unless I have some flash of inspiration, I think you probably need to go out on top, as it were. I've done these 3 thrillers. I have another one entirely different, set in the early 1980s and involving quite I hope, is a gripping plot tale with the publishers now. But that's obviously not contemporary. That's a long time ago. That's 40 years ago. But I do think that. So I think this trilogy, which I'm calling a trilogy, because I think it's probably come to a natural end. And it's nice that people like the characters, because when I first wrote the Rhino Conspiracy, it was more like I'd done it over 3 years, more like a hobby to see whether I could do it. And when Sarah Beale of Muswell Press liked it so much, and when they published it, they all said, "We want to know what's happening to Tundi," to the person I regard as the main character. Though there's some strong characters in it, and you mentioned them, because the Rhino Conspiracy ends with uncertainty over her future. She's been made an offer, and will she take it up? And they wanted to know what would happen to her. So I said, "Oh, okay, well, I better write about." They wanted me to write another one, and then they said we want it in a year. So instead of 3 years, I then had a year to write it to deadline, and it was more or less the same with the Lion Conspiracy. But so where's but they've all been enjoyable. And the thing, I don't know what it's like with other crime writers that you have in your program or your in your club, but I know the general plot before I start, because otherwise you can't really start with a plan. But it takes all sorts of twists and turns that are completely unplanned, and you hit a situation where you think, how am I going to get from here to there in order to get to the destination that is planned? And you have to think about that, and you have to invent that and characterize it. So there's lots of scenes in it that I didn't plan, in the sense, with a blueprint before I started.
Did the characters ever kind of surprise you with the direction they wanted to take?
Yes, I think in some ways. I mean, you get the sniper towards the end of the book feeling that he can't keep doing this forever. And you get that general sense with all of them, I think you do. Because they're a small band of activists fighting some pretty sort of formidable forces of nasty people. And they're worried, the sniper's worried always about whether he's been too lucky and he'll get unlucky at some point. And I won't reveal what actually happens to him in this thriller, but he's constantly thinking about, is his luck going to run out? Because he's there to kill the bad guys, but in doing so, he puts his own life at risk.
We talked before we went live, didn't we, about the fact that you've written mostly non-fiction,
Yeah.
obviously, because you have a lot of interesting things to to say in non-fiction. Is it what's the kind of differences? Because obviously you got to research a lot for both. Did you find the non-fiction writing helped when you moved over to fiction?
Um, I think, in the sense of being able to research things in a reasonably rapid fashion and to be able to understand the core of anything. I mean, I always think in life, and that this has nothing to do with writing, but generally for all of us, and I hope this might be useful. And certainly when I teach, I always mention this. You've always got to think, if you're trying to explain something, try to think of what is the guts of this. Because all of us can't see the wood for the trees sometimes. We're sort of surrounded by, we're bombarded with facts and figures, but we don't often see the big picture. So I think writing non-fiction books, and I've written a lot of them, and I'm in the middle of writing one now, should be published next year, is that you need to understand what is this about. You need to write about it, as I think most of my, if not all of my books are quite readable as non-fiction. But then, so you've got to keep the reader turning the page. And I think that's out of my own experience, because as I said to you before we came on air, I find a lot of books really boring to read that I have to read, particularly academic ones. And I'm sorry, because I have friends in academia, but they do write complicated things that that they're sort of debating with each other, and that's fine for them. But I'm trying to reach a wider audience. So in that sense, in the sense of thinking about the big picture, even more so with a crime book, turning the page, because the reader is wanting to, it's a bit of enjoyable escapism, isn't it? That you do pick up information along the way, as you kindly mentioned you had, but the purpose is to just enjoy it. And learning is part of that enjoyment, but the purpose is, it's not like you pick a book up of mine, like I'm writing about corruption and the way that freedom movements, liberation movements throughout history, independence movements get corrupt when they get in power, and why that is happening, trying to understand it. Now that would, so when those books get published, it would be people who are interested in that and would want to really understand it. So that's a rather different thing, isn't it, from having an enjoyable page turning thing that keeps you gripped and excited, and maybe you don't want to put down. If you started, in at night, you maybe still reading it in the early morning. I don't think that's true for most non-fiction books, if any.
But I think the fiction could draw people in. I've read some of your non-fiction.
Have you?
Reading your fiction.
Oh, right, okay. You're
So
a glutton for punishment.
what do you teach?
Pardon?
What do you teach?
Oh, I've been I teach at been teaching at universities in South Africa, in Pretoria University's business school. I teach leadership and conflict resolution and communication. Those are the three main subjects. Leadership is what, based on my experience. I don't do it from textbooks, management textbooks. I'm talking mainly to business students, but I also teach similar things at King's College, London University, and have been doing for 10 years as a visiting professor at University of South Wales. Though because of the funding crisis in universities, I think that may come to an end, sadly. From experience, in the case of dispute resolution, it's essentially based on bringing bitter blood enemies in Northern Ireland together. In the case of leadership, it's just experiences from government and politics, and essentially how you manage people and how you lead people. That's what that's about.
We also talked before we went live about your experiences bleeding into the fiction. You called it action, which was quite nice. I think it's one of the things that draws you into the characters, because I think knowing that you are basing it on real things and maybe even real people and your own real experiences gives you more of an emotional connection to the fiction. But I'm
All right.
just wondering about how you feel about sort of incorporating that into your fiction, because you pay a lot of respect to people that you've known and your parents have known through the fiction.
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't quite thought about it that way, but yeah, it's a way, I suppose, of telling stories based on real life. Say in the anti-apartheid struggle, like the veteran was an underground, one of Nelson Mandela's underground chiefs, and he's got a lot of experience, and this guy's still going strong, and is still speaking and writing and so on, and agitating. And so I think if you haven't, I mean, he's quite tickled pink with the fact that he's in a thriller. He doesn't always agree with what I have him saying, mind you, and he didn't want to endorse the Lion conspiracy in the way that he did very generously for my other two ones. But I mean, that's because he didn't agree with the way that I'd portrayed the veteran in this instance. But the others, I think, are quite enjoy it and have helped me, because you need to make the people authentic. Obviously giving them characterizations that you want to describe, but they're based on observing people that you respect and like and know quite well.
And I think there's a genuine, like real, genuine heart sort of breaking experiences happen to the people in the books, don't they? There's
Yeah,
a scene in book two that I can still think of that's quite emotional, a hard read.
particularly for a woman, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah, if we're talking about the same scene, as I guess we might well be, this is something that happened to Tundi.
yeah.
Yeah, and I remember being interviewed about that in the Elephant Conspiracy by an experienced woman journalist in a radio interview, and she said, "Well, you've rather uncomfortably described what her emotions would have been going through this." And I just tried to. It's quite hard for a bloke to put yourself in the position of a woman facing that kind of threat to very sort of personal invasion of her personal space without kind of going too far about that. Um, but it was pretty unpleasant, wasn't it? And
It
she
was.
she managed she manages to sort of come out of it, but I had to try and think about how she coped with it and how she could be kind of reconciled with herself. But that was based on just reading about women who've been victims of kind of violence from men, and what their experience was, and what the ones who felt able to talk about it.
There's it's quite nice in this book seeing her kind of after the events of that and still thriving.
Yeah,
It was
good.
nice to come back to her and sort of know that she was okay.
Yeah. Well, as I said, she's a pretty strong young woman.
Oh, she's amazing, isn't she?
Yeah, but I think she's realistic. I don't think she's sort of some kind of I point out that she's got, like we all have, none of us are perfect, none of us are saints. We all got our weaknesses. She's quite sort of she can be quite short and bit sort of irritable with people, and she doesn't she doesn't sort of treat fools very lightly, does she? So there's that side of her, but then there's this incredible sort of fighting spirit that she's not going to be beaten by anybody.
Yeah. There's this book as well. You build in a lot of your kind of campaigns against of in sport against the apartheid. I think you mention a lot more about that, I think, in this book.
Do I?
I feel like it came up a bit in there.
Yeah, maybe. I also think I sort of, because I did quite a lot of the stuff about exposing corruption, as I mentioned earlier in our chat, it gave me an insight into what international corruption's really about. And there's a bit of this in both the others as well. I mean, because people tend to be very sanctimonious about, let's say, saying, oh, well, all governments in Africa are corrupt. Well, just look what happened, without being party political, in the middle of a general election. But look what happened under COVID in our own country, with some pretty dodgy contracts handed out to mates of various people in positions of influence. We have a pretty bad record on, and this current book I'm writing is going to be quite searing about, or quite coruscating about all of that. But but having been involved in exposing the global complicity of banks and corporations in the money looted out of South Africa, when there's still a lot of corruption in the country, like there is elsewhere in the world, Russia under Putin being a classic example. But that sort of gave me an understanding of the money laundering and the criminal networks to move wildlife parts, illegal wildlife parts, and such as rhino claws and teeth, and the big complicity that there is from banks, from lawyers, from accountants, from auditors, from estate agents, a lot of them, including in London, especially in Dubai and Hong Kong. This is not just something that you can point a finger at people in Africa about. It's a global problem.
Yeah, you go into describing it. It's like it was fascinating to read, and I would imagine is very much based on.
Yeah, that side of it. Obviously, you've got fictional situations and action, but that side of it, and the rather gory sort of scenes that there are in the Masai Mara involving lions are based on fact as well. So the killing of them and what happens to people who get caught out by the lions. But I don't know if you've ever seen these pictures, and you can probably find them on Google. But when lions are killed, massacred for poaching, they cut their paws off and their heads off. So you just see these majestic animals just lying there as carcasses without their heads, without their feet, without their paws, because that's what is valuable. And they're just reduced to just lumps of rotting flesh for vultures and hyenas and scavengers of various kinds.
And it's getting harder to fight as well, isn't it? Because you were talking about in this book them using drones.
Yep. Well, there were drones in the rhino conspiracy as well, but it's getting very high tech. It's not only getting, like war zones in safari parks, the fights between rangers protecting their precious wildlife and the poachers trying to kill them. In the case for rhinos for their horns, elephants for their tusks, lions for their claws and their teeth, for the bones that are then turned into various trinkets, or because the tigers have virtually been hunted to extinction. So now people are going for lions. And whereas tiger wine, which is based on tiger bones ground down and put into some kind of potion, has become such a rarity is almost impossible to find because there's so many tigers have been killed. So now they're going for lions. So now you get lion wine. And this is just human, grotesque, human, obscene human greed. And I find it very hard to understand, to be frankly. I'm not putting myself up as some kind of moral icon or beacon or anything like this, because none of us are, but I just find it hard to understand. How do people, for example, some of the rich elites, especially in Vietnam and China and in other countries, think that it's possibly true to grind down rhino horns and use the powder to create aphrodisiacs? I mean, or cocaine substitutes. There's no scientific basis for that, but they'll pay massive amounts of money for it, which of course fuels the criminal syndicates, bribes the politicians that protect those syndicates, and ultimately leads to the threats to these precious animals.
I'm intrigued about your other thriller you were talking about. That's with
The new one.
Yeah, what can you tell us about it? So it's set in the 80s.
Well, it's up to them whether they want to publish it, but it's set in the early 80s, and it involves well, a four-country plot between China and Zimbabwe and South Africa and Britain. But it's the early 1980s, so you're talking about apartheid South Africa, not post-apartheid South Africa, which is what my three thrillers, the trilogy, are set in. So it's of a very different kind. But I think I went over it very, very carefully, the first draft, and rewrote a lot of it, and honed it up and shortened it, because one of the things I've learned working with Sarah Beale in Muswell Press is you've got to be quite a tough editor. She's a very nice person, but quite a tough editor. Thriller writers, all writers, need good editors. Need somebody to say, hang on, do you really need that chunk of information in the case of a novel? Or can't you cut that down or take it out entirely? This is superfluous. And that's true of both kinds of writing, fiction and non-fiction. But whether they like it or not, I don't know.
I mean, sometimes I think with yours, that some of the insights that you put in, like especially like in the first one, I remember learning quite a lot about how parliamentary privilege worked.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Which I didn't know anything about. I'm not.
No. Well, there's no reason why you would. But and the character Bob Richards, who does, some people say, bear a bit of a resemblance to me, uses parliamentary privilege. And just to summarise for those who are not aware of the detail, when you speak as a member of Parliament, whether you're an MP or, as I've been for the last 8 years, getting on for 9 years as a member of the Lords, you cannot be sued for anything you say. So that's parliamentary privilege. Parliament is sovereign, and when you are speaking within the chamber, either chamber, you cannot be sued. It does impose a responsibility. You can't, I've never exercised it lightly. You can't smear anybody. You shouldn't, and you should base what you say on the facts, not inventing anything. So provided those two conditions are satisfied, integrity and facts, then there have been times when I've used it to good effect. But that it comes from centuries ago, when Parliament was asserting its right against a rather nefarious king, should I put it that way. And there was a big battle in which, in the end, Parliament won, and that was and the people of London supported Parliament. And that's when the cry for privilege came up. So it dates from then.
I was refraining from making the link between you and Bob Richards.
What, in the interest of civility, was this, Kaz?
No, I kind of thought it was, you might have got bored of being asked if you were.
No. Well, there you go.
A little bit of Bob Richards was a little bit of you, but
Yeah, quite possibly. People tell me this. I couldn't possibly comment.
Donna said that she'd heard the phrase parliamentary privilege, but didn't know what it meant.
All
So
right. So,
you've educated someone. She's also said, "How do you relax? Does your mind ever rest?" It doesn't sound like it does.
Elizabeth often has a go at me about that. But how do I relax? I love walking, and I like watching football, which is a bit of a problem in our marriage, because Elizabeth's a rugby person, not a football person. I'm football mad, and my team is Chelsea, and she just when the Premier League season comes round, there are lots of dark looks in our marriage. But I do I escape that way, and reading thrillers as well. And I'm a pretty easy touch for a good crime drama on television as well.
I'm with Elizabeth.
Well, most women in my experience are, but there are lots of women fans as well. And what I'm quite interested in is my granddaughters, and I have 4 out of 7 grandchildren, all play football. Well, the youngest, I'm not sure whether she's going to, but the other 3 played at quite a kind of serious level. So youth level, I think that's great. So it isn't just a male sort of preserve anymore. So you might have to come to terms with it, Kaz.
I might have to, but I live in Yorkshire, so rugby's,
Rugby's yeah.
You're allowed to
Well,
like rugby.
I'm speaking to you from South Wales, so rugby union is the sort of national sport. In fact, more people follow football, especially now, than rugby in Wales.
Yeah, but rugby. Both are well in my family. Both are liked up in Yorkshire, but rugby league's more of our thing, isn't it?
Rugby league, yeah.
But we do like both. Donna said football's not relaxing, and neither is being a Chelsea fan.
Well, Donna, this won't placate you, but I've been a Chelsea fan since I was 15 in Pretoria, living in Pretoria. When we knew we had to come into exile, my brother and I looked at a map of London. A friend was putting us up, and we knew about Chelsea, and Chelsea was not far away, the ground. So we decided we'd become Chelsea fans. So I haven't just become Chelsea since, it's become a top club, because it was a pretty quixotic club for a long time, winning things, getting relegated, had some characters in it. So I've been a long-term supporter. I'm afraid you get addicted to this and you don't change.
Fair enough. One of my favourite questions recently, you've probably been asked this before because you've been with us before, is what have you read recently and enjoyed?
Oh yeah, I've got to like. I don't know whether you know her, but Sarah Saltoun's crime thrillers. She's a former CNN news executive, and she started writing thrillers about the time as I did, I think. And we appeared on a book festival together, and her first one called The Source and My Rhino Conspiracy, and I got to know her a bit and read it, and then I was asked to do a cover endorsement. So I read hers. I enjoy hers. I'm reading a David Baldacci at the moment, which is, he's a mega thriller writer. And I'm also, there are a couple of non-fiction books that I've recently been reading. One of them was James O'Brien's They Broke Britain, which is it's the people who, in my view, though this is the wrong time to talk politics, are the people who destroyed the country. And he's pretty coruscating. He's not a Labour person particularly, so as I am a Labour politician, but he's a He calls himself a militant centrist. Anyway, that's pretty riveting read. Just to get you angry. Then I've been reading, and I'm well into it, Winnie and Nelson, which is the story of Nelson Mandela and his wife Winnie Mandela's marriage, as it were, from the inside. It's, to me, you've written a biography of Nelson Mandela. It's the only short readable one, because there were lots of amazing, but they're all 500, 700, 800 pages on him, including his own memoir. But I'm finding out things that I didn't know. So that's really enjoyable. And I've also been dipping into, I mean, I've been reading other thrillers and novels, but also dipping into Paul Johnson, you know, the economist who comes on the TV and talks about budgets and parties, election manifestos and things like that. He's written a book about Follow the Money, which for somebody, I mean, you know, it's not a kind of page turner, but it's actually, for that kind of thing, pretty readable and quite startling, the absurdity of the way we run our financial and economic affairs in this country. So that's what I've been reading. But James Baldacci, and before that, very recently, I read Gerald Seymour's latest thriller.
When does your book about corruption come out?
It's due to be published in October. I mean, I have a first draft, but it needs a lot of work on it. So it's due to be submitted in October and due to come out October next year, published by Bristol University Press. But that's not one for the Crime Club.
No. Just adding it to my list of things I might want to buy.
But I hope that the new thriller might be in the future.
Oh, it will be. I read a book recently, a thriller by someone called Tom Fletcher, who you might know. He was in the
Oh yeah.
Foreign Office and the Lebanon, and his book was really good.
There's a friend of mine.
It made me think of your books when I was reading it. I was like, it had a vibe of your books.
He'd been based in the Middle East, I think, in Lebanon, so he knew a lot about it. Yeah. And another one that I read recently was Andre Rushton's. Somebody, as a friend of mine, wrote a book called Nick Hole's War, which gives you a really interesting. It's about a woman in Nazi-occupied Paris. Gives you a really sort of good feel for what life must have been like for an ordinary woman, young woman surviving Nazi occupation. And it's a novel, but it's partly based on her mother's experience, and then I think it was her aunt's experience. Anyway, it gives you quite a good insight. So yeah, those are the main ones that I've been reading in the last 6 months or so.
Sorry, go on.
Really, I don't have enough time to read what I want because I'm spending too much time writing.
Well, I mean, that's good for us. Less good for you. We've got a couple of minutes left, so you're going to remind people in a minute what they're going to go away and buy. We could talk to you. I could talk to you for hours, to be fair, but we've got a couple of minutes left.
Well, thank you. So this is, sorry, you wanted to ask me something, but then I'll
show us the book and remind us what people are going to go and buy.
This is The Lion Conspiracy, published by Muswell Press in the UK and in South Africa by Jonathan Ball. And as I say, it's about its strapline is collusion, extermination, insurrection, which gives you a sense of the corruption, the wildlife extermination, and the threat of insurrection around the whole time against the rule of law. But please don't think that makes it dull, because I don't think you'd be interviewing me if you found it dull.
So, it's a really excellent read. They all have been.
Oh, well, it's really grateful to you, Kaz, for saying that, and I hope your club members find it so as well if they're inclined to get hold of a copy.
I'm sure.
And all the best with your your endeavours in the club, and I hope that you have others who have interesting things to say as well. I'm sure you do.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll have some more people on soon. Are you going to Bloody Scotland this year?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I couldn't. I was invited, but on a date that I think I was invited certainly to a festival in Scotland, which I couldn't do.
Fair enough, because you have quite a busy schedule, so we do appreciate you making time.
Yeah, it's very nice of you to invite me on, especially in the middle of a general election campaign when things are busy for people like me.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry about that.
Problem. No, it's been very good of you. Thank you, and good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for having me on.